welcome. This is Face the Nation. I'm Sonali Wanikapabrigade. What an interesting few weeks it has been, and how theatrical. Now, whilst acknowledging the tragicomic aspects of the weeks gone by, tonight on Face the Nation, we decided to go beyond the critiquing of the situation as it is and try to take stock of the situation and look at ways in which we can resuscitate the economy. And to this end, we have invited as guests on our show 3 academics. They are all from the University of Colombo. Very quickly, let me introduce them to you. Professor Sri Hettige, Emeritus Professor, University of Colombo, joins us. He's a regular guest on our show. Thank you, sir, for joining us tonight. We are also joined by Professor H.D. Karunaratne. He's a former Dean of the Faculty of Management and Finance at the University of Colombo. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
And finally, our guest tonight, Dr. Priyanga Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. Thank you for joining us tonight, Doctor. Now, my first question is to Professor Sri Hettige. Professor, quite recently, Lonely Planet rated Sri Lanka as the #1 travel destination for 2019. However, now the situation that we're hearing of is quite different. In your opinion, how must Sri Lanka now brace itself? Tourism and agencies speak of very negative figures overall. How do we go beyond this? How do we resuscitate tourism? Because this is one of Sri Lanka's major ways of earning revenue.
Yes, certainly tourism has been a major contributor to our export earnings, or at least the earnings of foreign exchange. And given the fact that our trade gap is quite wide. We depend on a very few sources of foreign exchange, to really address the issue of the trade gap. I think we can't afford to really have a situation where we have a major decline in tourist earnings in the country. I remember the last figure that I came across was something like $3.6 billion US. But of course, compared to what we get from the remittances, it is less than half. I think remittances are now, around, just over $7 billion US. So what I'm feeling is that that we just can't afford to have a major disruption of the external economic relations that we have developed over the years, mainly because we are not in a situation where we can afford to have greater vulnerability. We have been vulnerable all these years, but I think we can't have more vulnerability, and certainly any major disruption in this area.
Speaking of vulnerability, there's a massive dependence on imports. I mean, even if you take, for example, life-saving drugs or fuel, for that matter.
Yeah,
the entire transport system in Sri Lanka can collapse if there is some issue with regard to fuel. No, and we have seen something close to it in the past.
I think the main problem, as I can see, is that we don't have much space to really manage both exports as well as imports. For instance, you can't increase exports, at will. You have to really, build up your capacity to produce export commodities. That you cannot do, all of a sudden. So we don't have really much space there. And then, of course, as you rightly mentioned, as far as imports are concerned, we don't have really much of a choice. For instance, if you take the major imports, I mean, the intermediate goods are so critical for us to keep our industries going. And then if you take the entire service sector is so dependent on imports. And then, of course, as you rightly mentioned, in the area of the consumption, I mean, we are not only talking about food, but we are also talking about medicine, and the entire transport sector, I think, is dependent, not only, in terms of fuel needs, but also in terms of the entire transport system dependent on import. So I think, I think the issue here is that we are already vulnerable and we can't afford to be more vulnerable.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Hettige, for your thoughts. My next question is to Professor H.D. Karunaratne, former Dean of the Faculty of Management and Finance. Let's talk a bit about the policy instability in Sri Lanka at present. We keep seeing this over and over again. This directly impacts investor confidence. There is very little investor confidence in Sri Lanka at present, with international investors, for example, holding back on coming into Sri Lanka, bringing in investments, as a result of which the country is again suffering. How do you view this, and how is Sri Lanka to move beyond this and get back on track?
Yes, Sonali, it is very interesting area where we need to concern about the foreign investment, because basically there is a problem in Sri Lanka. The local, in the domestic side, there is a gap between savings and investment. So even the private sector savings are less than the investment, and then there is government sector also. We know expenses are very big than the income, the revenue. So that the only kick we can get in for the Sri Lankan economy is we need to get huge foreign investment. But the problem is foreign investment has been dream for Sri Lanka for about 30 years. People thought that because of the war. But after even war, people expect to receive the foreign investment, but we haven't got as we expected. And in particularly in 2015, that the new government expected to get 45 billion foreign investment for megapolis projects, but it was not came. So now the important thing we need to understand how we go beyond this point. And there are short-term indices as well as long-term indices. At this situation, I think we have to focus domestic policies rather than going into foreign investment, because we know the foreign investment is essential, but we need long-term supply side policies to promote the foreign investments. Policy instability is a well-known thing for Sri Lankan policies, because last 3 years, the time to time, even three budgets were contradictory, and there were many policies. So I think the main problem in Sri Lanka, preparation of policies are based on whether actual facts or not is a question. I think in Sri Lanka at grassroots level, we do not have information correctly reporting to the ground level. Sure. Because we see that the Grama Sevaka level, still we are depending on the Grama Sevaka certificate to get the people's notification. What I always propose that there should be a computerized unit at the Grama Sevaka level to get the more information.
So, Professor, these are very basic things.
Yes,
so if these aren't being done,
yes.
I mean, the country is in a huge crisis, right?
That's what. We are formulating policies as we wish, but not with based on facts, the realities in the country. And what we need, what are the resources we have at grassroots level, we need to identify. Without identifying those resources, we expect that foreigners to come here and do investment. But foreigners asking why we should come to Sri Lanka. Do we have enough trained skilled labor in Sri Lanka? That there are a lot of examples we can give that where the foreign investors are going, where there is skilled labor, there are enough resources, low cost things. But when it comes to Sri Lanka, no even at least information. So the starting point, I think, to Sri Lankan economy, we need to collect correct information. And the very pathetic thing what we had is, from the independence, we could not identify who is poor, who is really poor. Because of that, we have been wasting a lot of resources in vain rather than for real need people.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. We hope to continue the conversation on those lines, Professor. I move my attention now to Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. Dr. Dunusingha, we can't ignore the political instability that is currently in issue these days. since that has been the sort of center point of all the other crises. Do you believe that academics, civil society, intellectuals, other groups can sort of join forces and do something productively despite or regardless of the political crisis that is currently in existence? How do you see these factors sort of playing together? Because clearly we have a political crisis at hand, and we're not certain as to whether this will continue for a long period of time or a short period of time. But on the other hand, we have all these other players like the civil society, like the academics, like people who want to get involved in taking the country forward. How do these equations work hand in hand is my question to you. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a strange question.
As I understood that, I think it is very clear that we at this moment face a severe political instability which has impacted on not just the economic but also the other dimensions of the society. So as a result of that, we have come to a situation where to some extent we do not know who govern the country, who really make decisions with respect to key economic policies. So because of that, we certainly agree that we need to have a political stability, in particular in a situations where the economy is facing a severe crisis. Partly the crisis we see in our external front with respect to rupee depreciation and the balance of payment. On the other hand, we could see that the economy in the domestic economy also face a number of issues. Now, I do not know to what extent civil society and the academia could really intervene into this situation and help in solving this situation, because one way or the other the civil society as well as the academia support either the party, and also the space for the civil society and the academia at this moment is very limited. In solving the present crisis.
Sure.
Because of that, I really need the two major political parties to understand the situation, the present economic crisis, and come to a certain settlement. Because if they do not reach a settlement, at the end of the day, it is not the UNP or the SLFP, but the people of this country suffer. So we see the rupee keep depreciating, we see the external debt stock keep rising, we see that Sri Lanka is being downgraded, and all of these will accumulate, and the people pay severe economic burden in next 1 to 2 years. So because of that, I think the political leaders should understand the situation without passing it to the previous or this government or the previous government. They must act, and I think if not, we will see a real economic crisis in coming
Certainly,
first to second year. Yeah.
Wishful thinking, and of course the need of the hour. Now, recently the Daily FT reported Mr. Bandula Gunawardena as saying that they have plans to stabilize the exchange rate at 160 rupees to the dollar. Is this feasible?
I don't think so. I don't think in the sense 160. The reason is that we know why the rupee keep depreciating. Partly it is because of the US dollar getting strengthened, and on the other hand, we have limited space, policy space in countering this situation. We have the reserve. If you look at the reserve position of the central bank, the reserve position is not sufficient in order to face the situation, because we have to keep the reserve in order to pay the debt. That the average debt payment per year is around 4 billion per year. In that context, and on the other hand, as the Professor Hettige mentioned, we are an import-dependent country, so that we have a limit, or we have certain constraint in limiting imports. Also, in a short term, we cannot expand our exports. Given these situations, I don't think that we have policy space, and the government could actively intervene into the situation and fix it at a particular rate. Rather, certainly if the politicians and the policymakers are concerned about the situation, they could certainly slow down the rate of depreciation. I think that is what we need right now, rather than fixing it at a particular rate.
Right.
That is impossible.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Very quickly, before opening the floor for questions from our journalists tonight, a quick question to Professor Sri Hettige. Now, since the legislative sovereignty of the people vests in the 225 parliaments that we, the people, have elected into power or service, really, can't we make a suggestion that parliamentarians regularly, mandatorily have to attend lectures on important topics like policy, on transitional justice, Professor, matters that they need to make policy on? Can't we make it mandatory for them?
Well, I think
or also discipline.
No, I think this is a very critical issue. Actually, when you look at the administration of a country, certainly people who are responsible for administering whatever they administer, they have to be guided by something, and that is basically, in the modern world, we say knowledge. You can also call it something else, like you have to face the facts. You have to be guided by facts. Now, I think you have to understand the situation in terms of what it is, in terms of facts, and then only you can figure out how you could really change that situation for the better. Now, I think we have a big issue, because we know not only at this level, national level, but also at other levels, we don't see this kind of knowledge-driven decision making. Take, for instance, even a local council. I mean, a local council, as you know, can do a great deal to alleviate the problems that the ordinary people face. Not only, small problems, but also bigger issues like massive, public health challenges.
Yeah.
But the point is that we have no way of having that kind of people controlling the local councils in this country for various reasons. Because, we have not really instilled in the minds of people in this country that they have to elect people who are competent, capable, knowledgeable to address the issues that they are confronting. Because, the ordinary people can't manage these issues. That is why we elect, governments, and that we expect the governments to basically address these issues in terms of applying knowledge. Now, for instance, the structure of the economy. People should know what is the structure of this economy. And we know that the structure of the economy has been changing over the last 40 years, 50 years. Now, now the present structure of the economy is such that, as I already mentioned, we are very, very vulnerable, because we are dependent on imports, and we cannot do very much about imports. And the same with, exports. We cannot do very much about exports in the short run. In the short run, but of course in the long run, certainly. So that is where national planning comes in. You know, in this country, we had a National Planning Council, you know, and then this National Planning Council was abolished in the late 70s. And up to now, we don't have a national level forum where the knowledgeable people will sit around the table and come up with policy options. You know, study the structure and come up with policy options so that these policy options can be presented to the decision makers. So, but you know, this process has not happened in this country for years. So, what I'm getting at is that, you know, it is very critical that people who are supposed to take decisions know what they are doing. For instance, legislation. What is the main function of the? There are several functions. What are these major functions of the, let's say, Parliament? I mean, I can point to one or two. Certainly, legislative function. You know, they have to come up with the best legislation to deal with the issues that we confront in the country. It may be environmental laws, it may be, you know, financial regulation, it may be, you know, building regulations, you know, it may be anything. Now, regulatory function. Now, for you to be able to come up with, you know, legislation to really regulate public affairs in the country, you have to have people who are knowledgeable. Now, of course, you know, other functions, like for instance, the financial control of the public finances, you know, is in the hands of the legislators, you know, in the Parliament. Now, again, you should know what you are talking about, what you are, you know, say, for instance, these are issues that are being discussed and debated in Parliament. And every one of these people should be able to understand the issues and contribute to the discussion and debate, and then to really take an informed decision as to, you know, how to vote for a particular piece of legislation or not. And then, of course, the whole issue of government policies. Now, policies are very complex, and policy making is a very complex process. And the policy making process today is driven by knowledge, not just in Sri Lanka, across the world. Countries that come up with best policies manage well. Countries that neglect the whole policy process go down the drain. Unfortunately, what has happened in Sri Lanka is that we have been going down and down because we have not really paid attention to policy making. Now, of course, you have to have specialists to contribute to policy making process, and as I already mentioned, we just don't have the mechanism to get the best minds to contribute to policy analysis. And now these are all weaknesses that we have within the system. Now, of course, we have an extraordinary situation in the country. Even under normal circumstances, we don't have a well-functioning machinery, state machinery. I mean, we have a suboptimal, you know, state apparatus in this country, and it has been so for a long time.
On that note, I'd like to open the floor for questions from Nadeem Majid and Deshan Gonawala. Deshan, let's start off with you.
Thank you, Sonali. I want to direct my question to Professor Karunaratne. Now, from 1948, essentially, we have been heavily dependent on the state. You know, it's something that's been ingrained in our people. Do you think that practically, given the situation now, even moving forward, that we can see a shift towards a more self-sustaining, towards a more different policy approach moving forward?
Yes, of course, because we know when it comes to 1948 that Sri Lanka was a very much developing country. The mass scale poverty was there, about 60% people were below poverty line. But now I think the world has become, as Professor Ettige also pointed out, world is now strategic world. So we need to have kind of a strategic answers for that. Because state means not only even this legislature and all others, there should be good institutions. That institutions, like for example in Japan, there is economic policy making agency. So that is economic policy planning agency. So we need to focus strategically by getting the data, the correct data for correct policy making, and addressing the policies by going in the strategic approaches. Because time to time we know the policies have changed in Sri Lanka, but those are only macro policies, not the going into grassroots level. We have never asked what really people need. Always Sri Lanka has been following the top-down approach. where a couple of people decide the policies and try to implement, but the grassroots level, what is happening is no one knows.
Professor Karunaratne, what's the reason for that? What's the reason for that top-down approach? It has been there throughout successive governments, whether they have been SLFP governments or UNP governments. It has always been that. Even during even when the economy was closed off, there was more isolationism under Madam Sirimava Bandaranaike, and then when President Jayawardena introduced the open economy, and even right up to the present, it's always top-down. Right up to, let's say, probably the most recent tax break that was given by President Mahinda Rajapaksa to the agricultural sector. It's always top-down. From the beginning, it has been that. Even in the Mahaweli project was top-down. What's the reason for that? Why have successive governments not really thought about going to the people and asking them what it is, what are the problems that they are facing? How is it that they can be resolved? What are the policies that they need?
Yes, the problem is that the policy making was not based on the scientific way, where the grassroots level information, using those information, we haven't focused what are the resources we had. For example, assume now Sri Lanka is saying that we have good location. Now this locational advantage we realized very recently. And even we had open economic policies. When we introduced in 1978 these open economic policies, we could not understand what is our objective. What is our objective? That if we are in an open economy, that we need to increase exports. Export is the ultimate objective in an open economy. But beyond that, we went into increasing more social welfare. So increasing social welfare, I think because of the democracy, 5-star democracy what we had. Each successive government expecting how they win in next time. So how they win in next time. So as a result, they give more subsidies, even that these subsidies are not going to necessary places. So without the grassroots data, that they provide these subsidies. So instead of that, we should go for the export.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Dunusinghe, Professor Karunaratne was just saying that, we give these subsidies and these tax exemptions and these tax breaks, and they don't really go to the necessary places. I'd like to focus on the most recent tax break that was given by the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to the agricultural sector. Now there's an accusation that this tax exemption doesn't really benefit local farmers, because the majority of local farmers don't even fall into the income tax bracket, and that this really benefits a handful of corporates and big plantation companies and rice mill owners.
Yes, I think to answer your questions, I think I would like to add something to the previous questions as well. Now we need to keep that in mind, the political economy of policy making. So why we have a larger state sector partly explain the political economy of keeping a say with the government when it comes to the economic life of ordinary people. So government wants to, one way or the other, have a impact on ordinary person's life, because in that way the government could get the political support, so that in that way government keeps certain programs, certain activities, and those are funded by the resources. So in that way actually the government make people to depend on government. It is true that the people also ask certain things from the government. At the same time, politician wants to have their pet projects in order to keep the people with them, so that they could maximize what we call the vote maximization from that perspective. Coming back to your questions, I think if you look at the recent tax concessions given, certainly according to my understanding, those are unsustainable measures. Why I say so is that we know that the government revenue as a percentage of GDP remains somewhere around 14 to 15%. it was around 11% in 2014. And when you compare with the other developing countries, generally the government revenue is around 18 to 20% of GDP. Why we have to borrow a large sum of money both from the domestic sources as well as the foreign sources? The reason is the budget deficit. That is the difference between the government expenditure and the government revenue is quite large. So in that context, I mean, rather than implementing some financial discipline and increasing the government revenue, if you try to give certain tax concession at this moment, it means that we have to again borrow money to fill the budget gap. And I mean, when you give concession to agriculture, the broader term agriculture, it looks that we cater to the poor ordinary people. That is a kind of a
But that's not the reality.
That is not the reality. That is kind of a slogan that you could put forward. We have given concession to agriculture, but the reality is that concession, nobody estimated the impact of that.
Dr. Dulcinga, again, this goes back to that whole thing of policy being made or decisions being made simply for the reason of political expediency. As you mentioned, in the latest round of tax concessions that have been given as well, it's really more about the optics than any actual thinking behind who this is going to benefit and how it's going to work. You said that these decisions have been very unsustainable. Now, going forward from beyond here, now there are two sides that are calling for, well, both sides basically are now saying, let's have an election, but they're both adamant that they want to be in government when said election happens. What do you take away from that?
I think it is very clear that we have experienced that throughout our history, the budget has been used as kind of an instrument to provide various concessions to people, unsustainable short-term handouts, and winning their votes. That is a strategy that is played out throughout the history. So now, in this context, the both party actually wish to have that weapon, and they know that they could make a huge impact on the electoral system and winning the people. So that actually, if not this change happen, I am quite sure that the UNP government would have given some concession through the budget.
Professor Hettige, I believe you were also a part of this committee. There was a that was appointed by the president, functioning under the presidential secretariat, the National Sustainability Vision Committee that was headed by Professor Mohan Munasinghe, if I'm not mistaken. There was a launch event to submit the report. That report, covering multiple sectors, was submitted. There was a discourse that was launched following that. That has also made some level of progress. There were consultations that were happening along that. What is the future of that kind of those kinds of measures? First of all, I want to ask you whether there was anything productive that came out of that exercise, and going forward, what do you think should be done with things like that?
Well, I think we are talking here about a long-term vision for the country. Where are we today and where do we want to go? How do we get there? Now, it's a kind of a long-term perspective on not only the economy but also on society, the environment, and so on, so that we can really figure out how we could guide the process of development in order to not only reach economic goals but also to balance economic goals with social consideration as well as environmental. I think that is really the wisdom that has really guided a lot of the global level discussions on development over the last several years. Now in 2015, the whole world converged on one thing, that is the way that we have been pursuing development cannot be continued without very serious adverse consequences, right? So that was the decision. So that is why almost the entire world came together and basically argued that we have to adopt SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, there are two other agreements that the world leaders reached, one on climate change and the other one is on disasters. Disasters are becoming more and more intense, and therefore it is absolutely necessary that we have to reduce disasters rather than mop up what happens after a disaster in terms of providing relief and that kind. So
in
the point
Sri Lanka, with this committee that was appointed to
that's the point. Now that's exactly. Now we actually took that message very seriously. I mean, coming from the global community. It's not just from one country, or it's from the the entire world. Basically, you have 165 countries, 180 countries, and so on signing. So naturally, we are also signatories to all three. We, as a country, not as a political party or anything like that. The country has signed these three documents. Now we actually took that message very seriously when we were appointed to this expert committee headed by Professor Munasinghe, and we did our job. Actually, we have put together a fairly comprehensive document that provide the necessary analysis of what is the situation today in this country and how to really bring about change in order to get where we want to go by 2030. Now the question, of course, is long term. Now we know that today we have an extraordinary situation where we can't even have 5 years. Let alone 30 years. We can't even have 5 years, because now normally in Sri Lanka, governments are elected for 5 years or 6 years, depending. Now it is 5 years. Okay, let's assume 5 years. Now the point is 5 years is a very short period. I can tell you, to bring about any structural change, it is a very short period. That is why changes have always taken place over a longer period. Like for instance, we talk about East Asia. In East Asia, certainly the progress has been phenomenal. I mean, if you take China, if you take Korea, Singapore, and all these countries, I mean, they have managed their economies. I mean, they have managed the economies, and they have been able to really achieve very significant, goals in terms of economic development and also social benefits coming out of economic development. Now the point is, it has not been achieved within 5 years, it has been achieved within...
Professor, but there is some semblance of policy consistency and stability that has allowed them to do that,
absolutely,
which we don't have here. But here in Sri Lanka's case, we're in a situation where decisions have to be made in the short term for the long term.
No, but I think
now with the specific question that I have with regard to this report of the Mohan Munasinghe Committee, the Sustainable Sri Lanka Vision 2030 document that has been given, the discourse that has been followed, when you look at the amount of money that has been spent on the exercise to date, and then you also consider the fact that I recall in 2015 you put forward a proposal for scientifically selecting a cabinet of ministers, a very small cabinet, and then we saw how following that the then administration, which is still sort of the same administration, I suppose. It's a bit of a Acharu situation, but we've seen the scientific method that they have applied in appointing cabinets since then. When you see that when even a simple sort of recommendation of that sort is not being followed, are you confident that something as grand, the grand sort of change that is being proposed through the Sustainable Sri Lanka report will actually come to fruition?
Well, I think this question has to be put to the people in this country because we are talking about their future. You know, it's not the future of the political elite that we are talking about. You know, if the children of this country want to have a decent life in the next 10 years, 20 years, or whatever, if they want to have a secure environment in terms of environmental catastrophes and so on and so forth, if they want to live in a just society where equity, you know, is an accepted norm and so on, where people have equal access to, you know, resources, equal access to opportunities. I mean, this is really a question that we have to put to the people, and the people have to decide for their children, not for themselves. Actually, we have to decide for now the question, of course, is if you do not have this kind of a perspective, and if you do not really manage your economy, society and the environment in the way that we have outlined there, you are basically saying that your children have no future. Is that what our children, is that what the parents want? Parents have to ask the question whether they want to ensure that their children are going to have a secure future, have a, you know, decent life, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, it's not a question that we have to put to the political elites, because the political elites have responded in the way that they have done. No. Now, I think the point is, it's true that we have a 5-year, window, 5-year window. Now, the point is, because you have only 5 years, you have to have what we call national consensus on critical policy issues, policy matters. You know, national consensus. Now, the question is, now this would have been put to the political leaders, you know, across the political divide, and they would have accepted that unanimously, because we are not talking about a particular government, we are not talking about a particular political group, we are talking about the future of the young children in this country. So the point is that the voters in this country should be put to the test. I mean, they should ask the question whether the governments that they elect would like to pursue a long-term development strategy that would address all these issues that are really real in the present day, and to ensure that their children will have a better future. Now, so there's a negotiation between the politicians on the one hand and the citizens on the other hand. That citizens would negotiate with the political elites in order to create a better life for their children. Now, I think so. It is not a question of whether we want to push this or whether, you know, whether anybody else. So I think that, you know, the voters should ask the question: what do they want the governments to do, irrespective of who is in power, in order to make sure that their children have a better future, their children have a secure future, that they are going to live in a society free of violence, they are going to live in a society where there is justice. I think these are the questions that we have to put to. So it's not a question of putting this to the elite, but so that is why it is necessary to have a bipartisan approach to dealing with long-term problems in a society. Now, say the structure of this economy can go on like this. There's absolutely no way that we could continue with the present structure of the economy.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Hettige. On that note, we go in for a short commercial break. We're discussing ways in which this economy is to be resuscitated. We'll be back after this short commercial break. Stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We've seen weeks of bickering across political fora. Let's just try to take a step back and try to collate our information, collate our knowledge, and see how we can try and fix this economy. So to that end, we'd like to continue the conversation with our three academics. My first question is to Professor Sri Hettige once again. Professor, just like in society, we find that, for example, there's a lot of sexually frustrated people in countries where there is no proper comprehensive sexuality education. Similarly, what do you attribute a bunch of shameless, unconscionable, power-greedy policymakers? I mean, why do they exist Is it because we don't call for a minimum set of educational qualifications? Is it because our education system is flawed? What exactly is the problem? Can't we just nip it in the bud? I mean, even now.
Well, I want to take you back to 1916 when John Dewey, he was an educational philosopher, American educational philosopher. He published a seminal book, Democracy and Education.
Okay.
Democracy and Education. You know, his main argument was that education is critical for democracy.
Right.
You know, the role of education is to create an enlightened public, enlightened citizenship. You know, if people are not really given the orientation that is required for them to play a critical role in making their societies better, you know, that society is not going to really prosper. In the sense that in this country, we have really not used education for that purpose at all. I think, you know, our education system has been guided by instrumental values for a long time. What do I mean by instrumental values? Basically, education as a means to an end. It is not a means in itself. For instance, what do we want from education? We want to get qualifications, maybe a university degree, maybe even a PhD, and then we want to get jobs, and with the jobs we want to have a certain standard of living. We want to build a house, buy a car, and so on and so forth. Now that is what education has been by and large about in this country, and that is where the failure has set in. And I think that's a result. We don't really have a populace in this country which can really elect people who will take care of their future and the future of their own children. I think that is where we have, and you know, for instance, we have to make use of public funds allocated to public institutions to benefit the wider public. But what is happening today? We know that public money allocated to public institutions are not being used to benefit the wider public. Take, for instance, a local council. I mean, do the local councils really provide all the necessary services that the ordinary people need to lead a decent life? I mean, do the local councils clean up the environment? Do the local councils, you know, create conditions where the people have access to, you know, basic facilities and so on and so forth? I mean, so point is that it is this problem that we are facing, and that is why you have people electing the kind of people that you just mentioned. Right. So I don't think that you can blame the people who have been elected for behaving in the way that they do. I think you have to basically blame the people who elect these people to Parliament and to other various institutions.
So are you saying that the people we elect are a mirror image of ourselves?
Absolutely. That's absolute no question about it. And I think all these people that we are talking about, leaders, you know, and you know, and their followers, and the people who have been, you know, nominated by political parties to various bodies, elected bodies and so on, all these things happen because people are guided essentially by instrumental values. I mean, the point is, now you take, for instance, why do you want to hold public office today? Why do you want to be a minister? Why do you want to be, you know, let's say, Pradesh Sabha chairman? Why do you want to be this, that, and the other? I think this is the whole problem. Why do you want to be the head of a government institution, for instance? Why do you want to be the chairman of the People's Bank? Why do you want to? I mean, why do you want to be the chairman of the insurance corporation? Why do you want to be chairman of this, that, and the other? Now, the problem is, you know, I mean, the point is that those institutions, if you go through the mandates, if you go through their statutes, now say I'm a member of the police commission, and we always have on our table the statute that guides the functioning of the commission. Every day, when we have our meetings, we have it on our table, because we always check, you know, the clauses, and we always discuss every day when we meet. You know, we would never discuss anything without really consulting the basic statute. Now the point is, now if you take, for instance, the Pradesh Sabha Act should be read by everyone. who is connected with Pradesh Sabha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Similarly, all the legislation that govern policy making, bringing out, various legislation and so, I mean, those should be, people should not be walking empty-handed. They should be carrying, all these documents with them, as we do when we walk into an office. I mean, we would not go to, a lecture in the university without, our notes, without having our reference books and so on. I mean, all three are academics, and, that is what we have been, we got used to. I think this basic practice has to be instilled in the minds of the people. I think the problem is that our education system has done everything other than what it should do to create a better society. I think that is where we have failed, and I think, we have had I have written so much, I have published books on education, but the fact of the matter is that, people really do not want to bring about any major change. Now, I mean, I can talk, days on education. I mean, in any other country, we have primary schools and secondary schools, but how many types of schools that we have in this country? At least 15 types of schools we have in this country. Can you believe this? But that is what it is. But we have a National Education Commission, and National Education Commission is supposed to guide the decision-making process. But is that happening? No. That is the whole problem. So the point is that we have the state machinery, the parliament, all the ministries and so on and so forth, and then we have the public institutions, we have provincial councils, we have local councils, we have everything. And we maintain, 1.5 million people. 1.5 million people. Everything is paid for by the people. But the question, of course, is whether the people get these institutions to deliver. People, tell the people whom they elect that please attend to your job. That is what I'm sending you for. But that negotiation, that conversation doesn't happen here. People just go out and blindly vote, and I think one of these people had received over 100,000 votes. So I mean, this is the situation. So I think we have a long way to go. I think we have a lot to do. I think this is an opportunity for us to reflect on what has been going wrong in this country over a long period of time, and figure out how to rectify some of these things. I think we have to address these issues. I mean, like education is one of the most critical areas, and I think unless and until we address this issue, we won't be able to really bring about the necessary change.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I move my attention now to Professor H.D. Karunaratne, former Dean of the Faculty of Management and Finance at the University of Colombo. I'd actually like to pose two questions to you, Professor. The first is now, strengthening systems as opposed to strengthening individuals is something that Sri Lanka hasn't really caught on to. Yes. So it's always about who you know. It's always about, the culture of paying bribes. It's sort of inherent almost and accepted almost. Although there are, institutions such as the Bribery Commission and other state mechanisms to curb it. Now, in a country like Sri Lanka, how does one go about ensuring that the public service is strong despite whatever political mockery there may be? Because in other countries we see, a president or a prime minister can leave or resign. It doesn't really matter. The systems continue. The country moves along smoothly. But in Sri Lanka, it's a bit different. So how do you view this?
Yes, that is very interesting area where, even East Asian development, we say that the high quality civil servant played a crucial role in the East Asian development. How the Japan developed, how the Korea developed, the civil servants played a crucial role. In this country, of course, the public sector, even if you take, we have 1.4 million public sector employees.
Right.
But out of that, you see how many percentage of really educated people. Because if I say that, because the mass scale, the public sector recruitment has been going through the ministers or the parliamentary members through this recruitment process. So that is one of. And the other thing that even the public sector, some servants, you can see whether they have literacy. That is not only public sector, even for this country, I think as Professor Hettige correctly pointed out, education is the point we can change even the public sector. Because the literacy rate, so for example, we call Sri Lanka has 93% of literacy. Do we have literacy? Because literacy definition is different today. The literacy means today 5 things. One is, of course, the how many languages you can speak. How many languages you can use in the communication process. But in Sri Lanka, you know, even schools, there are 10,000 schools. Out of these 10,000 schools, we run 6,000 schools by only Sinhala medium today. Even 3,000 schools we run only by Tamil medium. Only less than 1,000 schools running with the Tamil and Sinhala or English and Sinhala. So the first condition of literacy is violating. The second is, of course, the most important thing, ICT. Third one is the financial literacy, which is even for a public servants, do we have a financial literacy? Where this country has a serious problem of financial literacy. I always emphasize, because even if you take any average family, what is their hope? That they say for their kids, go to a best school, a good school, and be a first in the class, go to university, you will get a job. So where the job is given by the public sector. But who is creating the job? The job is created by the public sector. So which is increasing tax from other people. So now entire society is going behind illusion of education, which cannot be used for the practical context. So everybody like to educate kids for what? To find a job. So our simple instructions for our kids that go to good school, go to university, good university, you will get a good degree, then you will get a job. So who will get the job? Now we know at this moment also 60,000 graduates are on the road. They are asking public sector jobs. Then the government will give the public sector jobs. Then the 1.4 million will be 1.5 million. Then the country is going to a crisis. So this the components of literacy we have to address very carefully. As you correctly pointed out, the networking. Networking among the public officers. To what extent the networking among public officers in Sri Lanka?
Now those days, now even in marriage proposals, women used to aspire to marry a government officer, someone with a government job. However, now if we take the reality, most government servants are so disempowered and they don't particularly care about the service they want to do. Of course, I'm talking about a certain section. So
the
that culture of lethargy or being lackadaisical or just not being bothered, where does it stem from, Professor?
I think as Professor Hettige also correctly pointed out, they don't recognize what is their mandate. What type of job they have to do, because they expect to perform only one area. But each public sector, if you say take any public sector officer, he has many areas to manage. As we learn in the education, that is not only the knowledge, there are skills they have to use, there are networks they have to use, and even the something innovative they have to do. So the component, what we call innovation, is very much lacking in the public sector. That may be due to the recruitment problem, or there are transfers, or there are allocation of the jobs. There are a lot of issues we have to discuss. Actually, this 1.4 million public sector, we have to correctly identify who should train, who should lead the country, where they are doing and what kind of skills they should use. So this, of course, day by day it is growing. But it is not an answer for our question.
Thank you, Professor. I move my attention to Dr. Priyanga Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. Dr. Dunusingha, if you are to list out better ways in which we can streamline our elected officials, how must we do it better? Right now, if you are a citizen of Sri Lanka, if you are over the age of 18, and there are certain other criteria, you can't be a criminal, for example, you can, ask for the people's vote. and you can be elected into office.
Yeah, we can
However, this system is failing. This system is failing in Sri Lanka. We are seeing it on a continuous basis, and it's getting a bit of a bore. So how do we go about streamlining the system? Maybe let's bring in minimum educational qualifications. Maybe let's bring in other criteria. In your academic opinion, what must we do? Or do you think we can't really do that?
Yeah, certainly we can list out so-called, what we call that must have, qualifications or attributes or, qualities or something like that. But I don't believe that a person with all those qualifications, with higher good education, with good characters and with good faith and all these, with all these qualifications, even if you elect a person like that, I don't think that he or she will work in line with people's expectation in this setup. Mm-hmm. In this setup, our institutions, we know that the behavior of a person is guided by the incentives given by various institutions. Even our family also an institutions.
Right.
Even the religious place is an institution. Working place is an institution. Then you can name up to the parliament, court and all these, places as institutions. Generally, the institutions provide incentives and accordingly people change their behavior. Now, if the family members are very much concerned about the education and encourage people to, the kids to study, then the kids will, kids study well. Unless, there are certain families whose, parents do not care about the education, do not provide right incentives, then the kids, do not care about the education. So, at the end of the day, what matters is that the incentives given by the institutions. Why public sector workers are very much, careless, lethargic and all? The reason is their activities are not monitored. Right. They don't have any, pressure on, they will be sacked.
Absolutely.
The salaries will be stopped. So, they are free to work as they wish. So that is the situation. So we have to set up right institutions, and those institutions must give the right incentives. Only then we can expect whoever the person who comes to the say parliament or the be elected as the president, they will act in line with those incentives.
Right.
So we have to build the right set of institutions. Even the some of the we can even the right to information bill we can take as a type of institutions. The commissions we set up under the 19th amendment, we can call them institutions. So those institutions will limit and provide certain incentive that limit the bad behavior of the politician.
Sure.
So we cannot just name these are the qualifications of politicians that should be there, and if they come, we have no guarantee that they will work in line with our wish. So we need to set up institutions.
More stringent mechanisms to monitor the behavior, actions of elected officials.
Yeah, we have to have checks and balances given by the institutions, so that even a robber come to the parliament, he has he has little room to rob the state. So that is what we have to, the civil society and the academia must try to introduce and get our elected people to set up institutions that limit the bad behavior of the politician.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your thoughts. Deshan, let's start off the questioning round with you.
Thank you, Sonali. My question goes to Professor Karunaratne. Now, you spoke very largely about the fact that there is a dependency on government jobs, and that this mindset needs to change, because if not, you're going to keep on adding, you're going to keep on taking from the public purse. Now, the thing is, is, as a university professor yourself, do you think our education system encourages people to move away from this traditional thinking? Because from my experience in school, and I'm sure from Sonali's and Nadim's as well, innovation is not something that is fed into the minds of the students. Entrepreneurship is not a subject that is constantly put in. Financial education is not something that is. So can you blame the students for wanting to be dependent on a state sector job?
No, exactly. What you are saying is the correct thing, where what I pointed out here is the literacy point of view. Still we think about the literacy means the ability of reading and writing. What you correctly pointed out, that we need to give these skills for the people. So we have forgotten many skills part of the education, and we are not providing that. That's why my argument was that basically the financial literacy should be incorporated into from the primary school to even university
Because
schools.
Professor, if I'm not mistaken, the last two big scientific finds in recent times, Professor Dr. Asha Devos and Dr. Hasini Jayatilaka, if I'm not mistaken, both of them were also privately educated.
Yes.
They had to go to foreign universities.
That's true.
And the fact that Sri Lanka's best research or Sri Lanka's best innovative ideas come from foreign universities means that there has to be something lacking in the local education system.
Of course, that's what I wanted to point out, that even the Sri Lankan education system, those who have gone into outside and they see what is the research going on, how the innovations doing, and they are trying to do innovations. And even Sri Lankan education system, there are no ways to promote the research within the universities also, because universities are basically like schools now, increasing every year more and more students for teaching, and there may be other facilities for research is lacking, because internationally there are universities, which means that they create the knowledge and they disseminate it among the people. But majority in our country, because of the time span and the workload and the money allocated, we know for the research and all these is very limited. So since we are not generating new knowledge, so what we do, the majority of people do that, we disseminate what the Western countries have done in Sri Lanka. So therefore, it is, as I also believe that it should change from the primary school to even university level, the education focusing on this skill part and the attitude part, rather than the qualifications, because people go for more and more qualifications, but when they start working, they know that what type of innovations they can do. So it is a serious issue.
Now, the immediate former government had a strong case. They brought in the fact that they are going to allocate 5 to 6% of the budget for education. What's your opinion?
But actually, they allocated only 1.5%, no? The actual percentage, so before the 2015, they promised that to allocate about 6%. But actually, actual budget calculation, you correct, that is only 1.5%. So the last 3 years period, the innovation or the research and development, the percentage has gone down from 2.5% to 1.5%. So we can't see the real motivation to increase the research and development in this country.
Dr. Dunsingha, now, there's a large number of students every year that finish their A-levels. There's a big chunk that comes to local universities. There's a much bigger chunk that doesn't. And you know, parts of that group tend to go to private universities, but not everybody can afford an education at a private institution. Now, do you think that necessarily improving or increasing the number of students that are admitted to local universities will be the solution? Or do you think that even if you increase the number of students that come in, there is still a serious shortfall in terms of the quality of the skills that can be provided to them?
Yeah, I think it is a very good question. I mean, I will start with the previous one. Just I have I see that in a different way. Now, why our student, university or the school leavers are very much willing to take up public sector jobs? Reason is very simple. They are very much rational. The thing is, look at, when you apply for a loan, if you are a government employee, you can get a loan. There are a number of, concessionary rates that you can get a loan. When you, make a marriage proposal, if you are a government servant, you have again upper hand. Job security is 100%. Okay, you don't have much pressure to work. Okay, So these are some of the benefits that a person received because of the lack of institutions governing the way that the workers work at the public sector. So unless you change the system, I think we should not just blame the university graduate or the school leavers expecting a job at the government sector. What we need to do is we need to get away with those those various benefits, rewards in the public sector, and make it equal like the private sector. Get away with the so-called permanency, get away with the so-called getting the job without getting the wage without doing the job. And in that, once you make that, I am certainly sure that they will be indifferent between the private and public. And getting back to the second questions, I think we certainly need to improve skills either through the public sector universities or the private sector universities. We should be mindful we are not in 1960s or 70s where the people find it difficult to bear the cost of education. Now, if you just look at, if you just ask the parent of a A-level family where the A-level student is studying, they will tell you the amount of money they spend for tuition. Okay, so that even we say we are a pre-education system, I don't think that education is free in the sense that when a family out-of-pocket expenditure is zero. So we need to provide opportunities, but the problem is that our economy is not in line with the skills that we improve or develop in the education market.
Where do you see that the Sri Lankan labour market should focus on when it comes to developing skills that are required? Where do you think that we need to focus on in terms of a strong suit to provide better labour, be it to foreign investors or even to big companies that potentially could set up here?
Yeah, skills, I don't see that it is science or computers or management, science. Rather, we need to improve the perfectness of our students. They have to do the things perfectly. Yes. That is what we are lacking. The average number of mistakes a worker, a doctor or the engineer or teacher or the clerk make is higher in Sri Lanka than in other developed and even the developing countries. We need to, for example, if you ask your clerk to take a printout after doing some write-up, he will make at least 5 to 6 copies of printout. Take 5 to 6 copies of printout, and finally the 7th one will be given to you. So the situation is the level of perfectness or the level of perfectness remain very weak, regardless of whether you have a degree or a PhD or even with the A-level. So that is what we need to reduce. Actually, we don't get most sophisticated production activities to our countries, in particular to developing countries. What is the reason? The reason is number of mistakes that we do remain relatively high. So we get a very simple economic activity. That is one of the reasons why we say that we have this number of graduate, science graduate, computer graduate, but they know level of perfectness and the number of mistakes they do remain very high. So because of that, you cannot persuade foreign investors to come here and set up sophisticated production activities. That is something that we have to address. We need to train to be perfect from the very beginning and do the work perfectly. So I think that is what we are lacking at the moment, regardless of the economic qualification. I think if we address that, I am sure that we can go a long way.
Professor Hettige, I just want to take it away from that for a minute. I want to ask you now, you were speaking about, to Sonali, about how Lonely Planet ranked Sri Lanka as the #1 destination for 2019, about exports. The thing is, even over the last year, exports as a percentage of GDP has decreased. it doesn't really show that exports is growing at a very encouraging rate, does it? So even if exports continues to grow, if we are still relying on other sources of increasing our GDP, it means that exports is not really playing as important a role as it should be.
Well, I think we'll have to certainly bring all these things together to understand the point that you are, the question that you are asking. You see, I think the main problem is not the employability of graduates as such. I mean, that certainly is an issue, and there's a reason why graduates are what they are now. For instance, we know post-independence period, we have been basically concentrating on what is called democratization of education. Not only democratization of politics, democratization of education. In other words, to expand the education system to give, equal chances to everybody to have education. Now, you see, now of course, what was missing was equally important, and that is the quality of education. Now, if you spread your resources so thinly across the system, you're going to get a very low level of improvement across the board. For instance, when you increase the number of schools, you have to make sure that you increase the amount of investment that goes into education. Now, the point is that when you look at you asked the question about 6%. That's an impossibility, because if the government has control over only 14% of the GDP, imagine taking out 6% of that. Where is that realistic? Because the point is that the countries that allocate 5%, which is the kind of fairly standard kind of thing in developed countries, you have a over 40%. Some countries over 50% of the GDP, going into state revenue. The proportion of state revenue as a percentage of GDP is over 40%. Now, if you have 40%, you can allocate easily you can allocate 6%. But the point is that in Sri Lanka this is not possible. So the point is that so the quality of education, quality of people who are coming out of the education system, all these are well known, and we know that innovation is the last thing that comes. I'll give an example. We have only about 30% of the secondary schools having facilities to offer science stream. Only 30%. 70% of the secondary schools do not have. That is the inequity that you have.
Professor Hettige, what is the reason for this? Is it because of the inability of policy making? Is it resistance to change?
I think the point is this. Now the point is, you have a cake, and you have to cut that cake into different sizes and shapes, right? Now here education, is an important area, but the point is that when you have other priorities, being more important, like for instance giving subsidies, providing health, providing incentives to public sector institutions and so on and so forth. I mean the point, and then giving employment to public sector, giving employment to school leavers and public sector graduates and so on. I mean the point is that that limited amount of money has to be allocated across different sectors. So education, has not been able to attract enough resources for them to maintain the the level of education across the board. For instance, with 1.6% of the GDP, you cannot really have better.
So then, what is the solution? Is it simply?
Well, no, I think we should not try to find a solution within the education system itself. Though education is important, but we have to equally look at the economy. Our economy has not diversified. I mean, look at the structure of the economy. Look at the structure. Today we have a situation where agriculture, has stagnated. Agriculture has not diversified. Agriculture has not given rise to the obvious thing. What is the obvious thing? Agro-based industries. Agro-based industries are almost non-existent, right? And so agriculture has, and then you move into industry. What is the industrial sector that we have in this country? The point is that
based on what Professor Hettiger is saying, you know, the failure for there to be diversification in the economy, what Professor Hettiger was saying about the lack of diversity in agriculture that promotes agro-based industries, etc. In your expertise in finance and management, why do you see, what are the biggest obstacles to get it to, what are the obstacles that need to be taken out to allow that to happen, and how can we actually encourage that?
Yeah, we need to understand what is actually should happen. If we think that the ultimate solution for this export growth or the agriculture sector, the one important area we have to focus is the farmer should convert into entrepreneur in Sri Lanka. Because farmers believe that my job is to only cultivate, somebody should come and buy my harvest. So that is the mentality we have given to farmers now. Every farmer, what they do, that they do cultivation and they expect somebody to come and buy the things. If the people are not coming, they force to government, then government should buy. Then that is kind of a wastage. So in Sri Lankan context, when we compare with the other, of course this education, agriculture and all these are kind of a chicken and egg problem, where we should start. Actually, as he mentioned that the education is important for farmers, because farmers' education should be based on particularly informal and non-formal education about the financial literacy. We know that we have made some Guinness record. The farmers have committed suicide because of they cannot manage the finance, because they haven't understand what is their role. In Japan, you can see a small plot of land farmer is cultivating, then they have cooperative societies, what we call production cooperative societies, and they are the people who add the value, and final product is transported by their cooperatives and the customer getting directly from the farmer.
Even in Sri Lanka, don't we have farmers' societies that meet and collectively decide when the water is going to be released, how much they're going to cultivate, what the output is going to be? Don't we have that kind of a system?
I don't think we have that kind of information dissemination among the farmers. Now you see, in one season they cultivate all one crop, then they say that they cannot sell it. Then in the other season they cultivate another crop, then they complain it. And going beyond that, of course, there is a institutional role, as he mentioned, that direct them into the correct path. And after the harvest, now there was a time period that Sri Lanka was about to self-sufficiency in rice. Then what is the mentality came from some politicians that we should not cultivate rice and we have to stop the rice cultivation in some areas. So that is not the mentality. What we have to do, if we are close to self-sufficiency in rice, as Professor Hettiger mentioned, that we need to go for rice-based industries, where in other countries they go for alcohol production, biscuit production, or some light manufacturing, or the small production from the rice. But the rice here cultivated only for human food. So if now everybody, if we ask anyone, if your income increased by 1,000 or 2,000 rupees, how much rice we buy additionally? We don't buy additional rice. I think only the 8% or 10% of people in poverty, they will say if our income will increase, we will buy rice. So the farmers' market is where? The farmers producing rice. But on the other hand, our cultural change severely affect on agriculture. For example, see that people have gradually changed into, say, people call rice. I want rice. What is the word called rice in Sri Lanka? Is the fried rice. But actually, the fried rice is made from the basmati rice, which is imported from the Pakistan. So the average, the people go for the imported rice, not for the rice and curry earlier. So which means the farmers are, they can't sell their product to the people in Sri Lanka. So where to go this farmer's product? Even if you say the vegetables, agriculture, in some seasons we have thrown the large quantities of vegetables for eating elephants, because this institutional role, institutions must focus on how to control, how to convert farmers from the cultivators to entrepreneurs and move that to the industry level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear the professor's final words after this commercial break. Stay with us. Not to sound pessimistic, but throughout the past few weeks, we've read of dwindling investor confidence, political instability, international concern, market implications which are completely crazy. So going forward, gentlemen, we said that during the show there was no knowledge-driven decision making. Going forward, how do we go about collating the knowledge of the varying stakeholders and practically take certain measures in order to better this economy, to resuscitate the economy? There are investors on the one hand, business persons, there are academics such as yourselves, there are the citizens who are now empowered. We saw the manner in which the empowered citizenry rose up in protest over the political instability and the political jackassery that we're seeing in this country. It's not just in Colombo, not just the Colombo 7 crowds, but also the common man that's rising up against what's being done to their mandate. So we have the knowledgeable citizenry on the one hand, we have all these educated people on the other, we have people with money, the investors. So we have systems in place as well. So how does the country go about resuscitating itself? There are certain measures we can take. So in your opinion, what can be done? That's my final question to each of you. Professor, let's start off with Professor Hettigue.
Well, you know, this is an extraordinary time that we are in today. So political instability, political turmoil, you know, all the issues that you can think of are around. But the fact, I think the main issue today is that what does it mean to the economy and the people. In terms of the economy, as I already mentioned, we are in a vulnerable situation. It is not something new. It has been around for a while, but of course we can become more and more vulnerable. In other words, you know, if we really do not come out of this impasse rapidly, within a short period of time and settle down and get on with the job, I think the people are going to pay dearly. And I think people will certainly have to understand the gravity of the situation and, you know, exert pressure on all the political leaders that you are playing with a very, very difficult situation that has to be dealt with in a reasonable manner.
Any measures, any particular measures that
well, I
the
think,
varying stakeholders
I mean,
can take?
it is probably too much to ask for, but nevertheless, in spite of all this trouble, I think we need to have some kind of a national consensus that we know we have to overcome the problems that we are confronted with through an orderly process, through you know, a process of you know, understanding and particularly taking the larger public interest into consideration. And also, I think the present situation has put so much pressure on public institutions. State institutions are so critical for the welfare of the people and the economy and so on and so forth.
Right.
And I think we'll have to make sure that these institutions are you know, somehow activated to perform their duties, including the parliament and also, of course, the other institutions and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we know some of the long-term issues have to be taken into consideration, because if you don't really address the long-term issues, like, for instance, we badly need a transition in the economy. The transition from, you know, very unproductive, you know, kind of a service sector. I mean, what I mean here is that, you know, it's not productive. I mean, all these service sector industries are serving the wider public in terms of providing certain services. But in terms of commodity production, in terms of export products, in terms of the things that the ordinary people need, I think that is where we are lagging behind, and I think we need to make that transition from a less productive to a more productive economy. I think we cannot really really concentrate entirely on labor anymore, because labor is a major factor. But the point is that labor is scarce today, and of course, in spite of the unemployment rate being very high among graduates, we don't have much of an unemployment problem, open unemployment among other levels. For instance, we need to make the transition from labor intensive to technology intensive production. But that's a long-term thing. That is where the innovation comes in. That is where the quality of education comes in. That is where the entrepreneurship comes in. That is where the diversification of the economy comes in. That is where rural-based industries, agri-based industries come in, and so on and so forth. So I think we have a long way to go. I think to make this transition possible, we have to manage the present turmoil, present impasse, in a reasonable manner, in a socially responsible manner, taking the wider public interest into consideration, not the interest of sectarian political groups. I think that should not be the main focus today. It should be the wider public interest, and the future of younger generations should be the focus of everybody, including the parents, not just the politicians.
Thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige, for your thoughts and perspectives. Professor H.D. Karunaratne, your final thoughts.
Of course, we are now in a crisis situation now, like we were before the 1978 or before the tsunami or after the tsunami or before the 1994. We are now in a crisis situation. But to get out from this crisis situation, I would like to propose about 6 things. The number one, I always emphasize that we need to get more information from the grassroots level, and we have to prepare a national plan and national policies, and then we have to formulate a national institute called either economic planning agency or the scientific decision making body we need for this country. That is number one. Number two, of course, the education is one of the areas. We have to focus about education reforms in this country. Unless we reform the education, we can't go like a developed state. The number three, of course, is very important, the export promotion and import substitution. Now, import substitution, particularly in agriculture sector, we can produce many agricultural goods what we are importing today. So we have to immediately start from that point, producing the essential things what we are importing from other country within the Sri Lanka. The import substitution easily we can do within the agriculture sector in Sri Lanka, and the export promotion should be based on the profit. The problem is in Sri Lanka, the government incentives and government kind of punishments we call carrot and stick argument, where the Singapore was used. The punishments and the incentives should be given to manage the economy within the profit area. Because why the income tax is low in Sri Lanka? Because our tax from the profit is very low. We are trying to get the taxes from the poor people from their pocket. So it is not the way to go. So therefore that the profit and the export sector we have to concentrate. And finally, we have to go for health and the social security sector, because we know population is aging and the number of people migrating, the more than 200,000 people every year migrate this country. So there will be a desert. Sri Lanka will be a desert. So in that case, we need to concern the people's the essential items in the country like education, health, all these things. So if we line up with these ideas, I hope, and have a wider discussions, wider forum, wider scientific approach to solve this problem, I think we can overcome this crisis.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your thoughts. Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, in your opinion, how does the country as a whole go about resuscitating the country?
Yeah, I think as I see, historically the East Asia was mostly driven by the values. But what we see today is that, I mean the Asian countries, what we see today is that we cannot let oh, we don't see the values are, upheld, and because of that we can no longer, have a faith on values that the, politicians and other, officials, follow values and, do their job. Then we have to replace the values by, when the values are deteriorated, values by laws and regulations. I think in order to set up required rules and regulations, we have to have institutions. Not just the political institutions, but even the economic institutions. What we see today is we could see a set of extractive political and economic institutions that, basically rule the country and take decisions in such a way that cater to only a few group of people. Only a handful of people. I think in order to, get away with this system, we as public must ask people to, or ask politicians to, come up with, what are the institutional reforms that they are planning to introduce once elected. I think rather than asking various handouts, jobs and other things during the elections, we must encourage and we must persuade politicians to propose certain institutional mechanisms that introduce checks and balances. Why we have come to this level, level of political instability? Reason is very clear: the lack of institutional mechanism to have required checks and balances. I think we should not let this continue and repeat again this type of political power change. So in order to avoid such situations, we certainly need institutions that discourage this type of behavior.
Thank you very much. Finally, before concluding the show, since we spoke a lot about innovation and the need for it, innovatively, if the citizens of Sri Lanka came up with this idea that all elected officials need to go to regular classes to apprise themselves, of, for example, education in human values, mutual respect, transitional justice, basic economics, basic technology. Do you think it's something that could be doable?
Well, certainly I think that is one way of approaching the problem. Certainly that is very important, but I would add one thing to what you have said. Certainly we need to introduce a new system of social audit.
Right.
Every institution has to be socially audited, and there are very simple methodologies that we can adopt, and every institution, every office can be monitored.
Right.
And evaluated in terms of a social audit, which can be easily done, and it can be done electronically. And I think we have to have a national system of social audit to really keep an eye on what these people are doing and what these people are not doing. I think that would probably help us to rein in this situation, so that we will be able to, at the end of the day, the citizens will have a handle on what is going on in the country. Social audit, I think, would be the mechanism that we can apply, and I think that would help us to rein in.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your thoughts, your perspectives, and your input to the show. Thank you also to Nadeem Majid and Deshan Gonawala for asking all the right questions. Specifically, thank you to Professor Siri Hettige, Emeritus Professor, Colombo University. Also, Professor H.D. Karunaratne, former Dean of the Faculty of Management and Finance at the University of Colombo. Thank you for your time. And finally, Dr. Priyanga Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout this drama, Sri Lankans have shown amazing resilience, and Sri Lankans have really come together to rise up against the political turmoil, political jacassery that has been going on. And as the saying goes, we shall overcome. Thank you for your patronage. We value you. Thank you for watching us. Good night.